Segment 2, the 12 freedoms gained when Juneteenth came to America. I want to go down the list and just compare and contrast, do a little analysis, thinking on an analytical level, and demonstrating some understanding of the paradigm shift, the way life was lived before June 19th proclamation and after, the transition that took place. And it did take quite a bit of time, still taking place. But here were some of the freedoms that, as I studied Juneteenth many years ago, that I came up with, dropped in my spirit, things that we have gained as a result of this law and proclamation to the last 250,000 African slaves who transformed into African Americans. One of the freedoms gained was the freedom to birth and name your children. As slaves, you really were forced to make children because they brought money to the owner. And you didn't often name your child because it was the master's, it was the owner's. Just like a dog doesn't name its puppies, or at least not that we know of. Usually the owner names the pups, the children. So it's a big change, a big shift. The next freedom, the freedom to create, to design and to create. Anything that you created and designed before Juneteenth, it belonged to the owner of the slave, and you really weren't given credit for what you created. It didn't belong to you. But after Juneteenth, there was a whole lot of creativity going on. That's something for further research and discussion. I want to go on to the next freedom, the freedom to dress. There was a certain attire that a slave wore. And usually you got your issue of clothes once a year, usually around Christmas. And children often didn't have much of anything to wear unless they were older and working in the fields. So the freedom to dress. The next freedom was the freedom to know and preserve your history. A lot of people didn't know where they came from, how they got here. They were moved around to work in different places. It's ironic that we still see some of this going on even now. Not knowing who you are, where you came from, not knowing your history. So one of the wonderful freedoms that came forth and that I'm so grateful that we are participating in is to know the history and preserve it. And art is a wonderful way to preserve history. Another freedom is the freedom to marry and to have a family. As slaves, you were not encouraged to marry. It really was not allowed, not on the normal, because people were sold and bought and they didn't want you to unite, have those strong ties. And so you weren't allowed to marry. But after Juneteenth came, we actually, an artist group that I participated with, I had my first opportunity to curate an art show, and I themed it Juneteenth then and Juneteenth now. And we studied and looked at what was life like before Juneteenth. How did we celebrate and preserve Juneteenth after freedom came? And we looked through the decades at how the African American transformed. That was quite an interesting exhibit. We had it in City Hall, in the Central Library of Fort Worth, and in the T of Fort Worth. So they had 3 exhibits showing Juneteenth then and Juneteenth now, and we were able to manifest preserving history. Another freedom was to serve in the military. That was something that I'm so pleased to say that our founder of an artist group that I'm a part of, her husband was an original documented Tuskegee Airman, and took a lot of pride in the fact that they were able to show the world that they were smart enough to fly those planes. They were smart enough or brave enough to fight, and courageous and physically fit enough. Smart enough, courageous enough, and physically fit enough. And so we want to recognize that that's one of the freedoms that were gained when Juneteenth came. So men and women were able to become soldiers and get paid after freedom came. Another freedom was the freedom to vote, legislate, and govern. As slaves, that was just no. And even after Juneteenth came, there was still a lot of fighting to be done to exercise that particular freedom to vote, be a lawmaker, and to govern. Still is. The next freedom that's listed, and I'm hoping will provoke thought, is the freedom to own and do business. As slaves, you didn't make money. You were owned by your owner, and they made the money off of your labor. But as an African American, you had the right to set up a business and make money and take care of your family. Take care of yourself, take care of your family. Another freedom was the freedom to grow your own food. It didn't just belong to the master, to your owner, the food that was grown. It was grown. You had the right to grow your own food, to feed your family, and to sell. The last 3 freedoms, the freedom to read and write, it was really a big deal, and people really flocked, and even our government wanted to empower newly freed Americans to learn how to read and write, because that's such a wonderful freedom and a skill that's so necessary. The last 2 were the freedoms to travel and the freedom to worship. Those as well were very controlled by the owner, and we are really grateful for the freedom to travel and to worship. So those conclude the 12 freedoms gained. I have a couple of exercises that are listed, but I'm going to also speak them to you. One, I'd like to encourage you to categorize those 12 freedoms. Set up a column. Important to a person, column 1. Important to a nation, column 2. Important to a family. Put those 12 freedoms, put them in one of those columns. Maybe they'll be in all of them, some of them. Analyze those 12 freedoms by sorting them, categorizing them. Think about it. And then the final activity that I'd like to recommend is choose one of those freedoms create a sketch or a painting or a mixed media or even a graphic design of one of those freedoms or of all those freedoms. And for those 5 W's and 1 H that I talked to you about, I want to challenge you to create what is that, a graphic chart, with the circles connected of the 5 W's and the 1 H. Design and create a graphic organizer. And another activity I want to encourage you to consider is maybe with those 5 W's and the 1 H to create some puppets of the characters that were at June 19th, 1865. Gordon Granger, the United States Colored Troop soldier or soldiers. The citizens of Galveston who were white. The African slave. Here's a real thought-provoking one. The newly freed African American. Those are some creative things that you might want to consider doing with your gift of art. And I want to thank you again for taking time to listen, to lean in and to listen. Again, my name is Tanya Tichenor Starks. I'm a former third grade teacher, and I am also what I call a Sankofer. I love to reach back into the past and get the gold. Thank you so very much.